Se me ha acabado el presupuesto para dubstep y partículas, así que aquí la tenéis, la intro de Necro for Fun.
El puto amo.
Without mercy, I need help. I need you.
Listo, vamos a ello. Campfire del viernes.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to
Del
another
viernes
Diablo
28 de
4
julio.
Campfire
Vamos a hablar del
class.
parche
My name is
1.1.1.
Fletcher. I am the Associate Director of Community here on Diablo. Joined here by Joe Shelley, Game Director for Diablo 4, Mr. Joe Pipora, which you guys know.
Pidepora, Shelley,
and Joe as well.
y Jackson.
I mean, familiar faces.
Sure.
Associate Director for Diablo 4, and of course, Adam Jackson. Brand new face here. He is our lead class designer for Diablo 4. We have a lot to talk about today.
Yep.
In fact, just note, there's two Adams, two Joes, so this is going to get really
Hay dos Adams
confusing
y dos
here.
Joes.
Bien,
gracias por la cuña. ¿Empezamos?
Maybe we do like a battle royale or something like that to, determine who talks next or whatever. But,
Jackson es el class designer, pero el diseñador de clases, no de balance. La de balance es la otra chica, la asiática.
Campfire Plus.
Campfire Plus,
Yeah,
easily. Plus.
Yeah.
It's like New Game Plus or whatever.
Okay.
But we do have a lot to talk about, specifically around patch 1.1.1. Did I say enough ones?
Yeah, you did.
111? 111, patch 111.
We did.
We are going to talk about some balance changes that are going to be coming to that patch. And of course, we're also going to be talking about the dates of when that patch is actually going to be hitting, along with when players will be seeing
Venga, nos van a contar cuándo sale el parche 1.1.1
does actually hit, but we'll talk about that here in a second.
del parche entero.
I know we do want to jump right into it because we do have a ton to talk about.
Y tiene un montón que contaros, o sea que no van a perder mucho tiempo.
Over here to Adam Jackson because I know he wants to talk a little bit about kind of like the class balance and what we're thinking about.
Adam Jackson ha traído para hablar del balance de clases.
Yeah, totally. Glad to be here. We have a lot to talk about. So, first I want to kind of frame this in our goals and what we're going to be doing in this patch in the immediate future, and then talking a little bit about kind of how the class team feels about classes and kind of what we're thinking in a more mid to long-term space. So, for this patch, we've got a lot going on. One of our goals is kind of, I think, obvious to the community. We want to kind of improve the effectiveness and the fun of the sorcerer and the barbarian.
Vale.
So we've got a lot of changes coming in there.
Viene un montón de cambios y el objetivo es mejorar la eficiencia del bárbaro y el mago.
Sorcerer, and then what we're thinking about with the barbarian, because they both have kind of different things going on. For the sorcerer in this patch, we're focusing on reducing something that we call kiss curse mechanics, which is kind of, I know, a very designery term, but it's this idea that we give you a really cool power effect, and then we kind of take something away or make it nerfed or nerf some other part of you in some way, usually for balance reasons, to make sure that it's not just out of control in power.
Yeah,
Estamos hablando del mago.
Like, to your point, it's like, so we really have like 20% we can afford to give you, but if we take 10% of something else away, we can give you 30% or 45% and feel a little bit better about that.
Exactly. Usually it's to sell a fantasy in a really strong way, but we can't do that justifiably without just breaking the mechanic. But we found out in a lot of ways we've been a little too harsh with that, and so we're going to try and reduce or remove that in some cases. And then the other one is late game survivability. We know that the sorcerers typically have a tough time, when they start pushing those later Nightmare Dungeon tiers, and so we're going to be looking at ways to increase that specifically.
Dice que van a intentar aumentar de alguna manera tanto las cualidades específicas del mago como su propia supervivencia.
That's just no longer going to reduce the duration, it's actually going to increase it. So that's an example of something.
Dice que un ejemplo es como lo que pasó con la Hidra, que lo que hicieron fue bajarle la potencia y bajarle la duración, y luego hicieron el contrario, bajaron la potencia pero aumentaron la duración.
We're going to be improving the fury generation that you get from your basic skills. And then we're also looking at the late game for the barbarian by making a lot of their uniques more attractive and effective.
Vale. Los cambios al bárbaro van a ser que sus autoataques generen mucha más furia y que los únicos de final de juego sean mucho más potentes y atractivos. Para que realmente los únicos los quieras tanto y ayuden tanto que sean lo que haga el bárbaro útil.
Specifically items like uniques. Many of these changes only take effect on new items, right? Like I think we have an example of the Hellhammer here.
Yeah, kind of. It's a little bit more complex than that. So we're going to delve into one of our examples of what we're updating here. But when we update a unique item, we actually update Hellhammer in two different ways. So we're increasing the duration that the ground is going to be ignited and burning, and then we're also increasing the damage, and that's the actual unique effect power, you know, the exciting thing that the item does. But you can see here on Hellhammer, we're also doing another change where we're actually granting you bonus critical strike damage and removing the bonus damage to crowd control enemies, right? So
Vale, entonces van a hacer algunos cambios tipo aumentar el daño y aumentar el daño crítico, haciendo cambios, por ejemplo, como lo que pone. Cambiamos el daño a enemigos afectados por control de masas por directamente crítico. Vale. Esta línea en medio. Pero esto no se aplica a los ítems que ya tenéis. Tenéis que volver a refarmearlos. Después del parche 1.1.1 tenéis que volver a conseguir ítem para conseguir las nuevas cualidades. Lo que tenéis se va a quedar como legacy. Entonces el de la derecha es más atractivo porque tiene más daño en su habilidad única y más daño crítico en lugar de daño a enemigos afectados por control de masas. We're looking at builds that aren't really hitting a high enough power level, and we're going to be just buffing them and increasing the power of them, so they should feel better and be more competitive. We're also going to be looking at increasing the attractiveness of kind of uniques across the board. We're focusing on Sorcerer and Barbarian for this patch, but we actually believe that we can do this kind of thing across the board. There's a lot of uniques that we think aren't really hitting the mark. It's something that's kind of a tough thing that we talk about a lot on the team, because you know the roles and the things that the uniques have as far as their item power are all fixed, right? They can't re-roll different stats all over the place. So we could very easily just make, you know, all uniques really good by putting all the best stats on the items, right? That's an easy thing to do for us. But we kind of have a push and pull there where we don't want to just make all of them clearly the best. Dice que lo fácil sería coger todos los únicos, subirle los números y ya está. Pero no quieren hacer algo así. Para hacerlo con un poco de cabeza y balance, van a ir por partes.
But we think that we are just not hitting the mark on a lot of them, so we're boosting them a little bit and then just kind of seeing how that goes.
Van a bufarlos un poquito, van a ver cómo responden las builds y luego se plantean si hay que bufarlos más o hay que hacer otros cambios.
So there's a lot of effects on legendary powers and in other places where, you know, this effect only works in a very narrow use case, like only on a single skill or a single group of skills. Or
dice que hay determinados efectos que están como demasiado enfocados a esta habilidad o a esta build muy concreto, y que una de las cosas que van a hacer es abrir el abanico de posibilidades, tipo en vez de que afecte a Tornado, que afecte a las habilidades primarias en ese plan.
Currently it gives you the bounces of Chain Lightning do bonus damage when it bounces off of you. And we're going to change that so that it just does bonus damage when it bounces off of anything. So instead of being kind of a narrow use case where you're only using it like on a boss or a single target enemy and getting value, you'll just get it a lot more often now.
Dice, por ejemplo, en el Chain Lightning, que es una de las habilidades de mago, hay un bufo que potencia el daño de Chain Lightning cada vez que rebota en ti. Entonces en single target se lo tiras y pega al enemigo, a ti, rebota, etc. Van a hacer que sea sencillamente cada vez que rebota, lo que te permite que sea más versátil.
Like going forward in the game, other things we want to do. Not all of that stuff is in this patch.
Yeah, right? No, we have a lot of talks on our team. We have a lot of things that we're thinking about and going on. I thought it'd be really good also to kind of talk a little bit about, you know, how we feel about more longer term goals and things about the game.
Dice que sí, que el patch 1.1.1 está muy bien, pero que tiene más cambios pensados a largo plazo.
The team's kind of focus on. The first one is kind of finding ways to bring different types of damage closer together. As I'm sure many of you in the community know, vulnerable and crit are really, really strong right now. Kind of a lot of the meta is about, you know, you make an enemy vulnerable and then you do bonus damage to them and then you stack as much crit strike chance and crit damage.
Dice, el meta actualmente es vuelves a un enemigo vulnerable, stackeas crítico y le metes una hostia como un camión. Y que quieren cambiar ese combo, que no hagas combos de ese tipo.
We have like damage over time or dot damage, things like Firewall or Shadow Necro does a lot of this. We also have overpower as a mechanic in our game.
Dice que quieren manipular las mecánicas para que sean igual de efectivas, el arrollar, el daño degenerativo, daño de sombra.
So we're going to be trying to find, our goal is to find a way, and we're working on it right now, that all those different ways of dealing damage have a lot of parity. So no matter if you're in
Dice que su trabajo ahora mismo no es meter muchos nerfeos, sino que van buscando que el combo vulnerable y crítico sea igual de poderoso que todos los demás combos. Entonces están viendo a ver cómo calibran para que daño generativo, arrollar, etcétera, sean igual de fuertes.
This is something that I think is a big opportunity for us to open up just excitement in different builds in the game. And what I mean by this is we have a lot of legendary powers and effects that like spawn a new thing. An example of this is like on the Barbarian, there's some legendary powers that spawn earthquakes or dust devils. Another one is the Necromancer has like things that leave shadow trails on the ground that deal damage.
And these things, they deal with what we call flat damage, which is like we give it a damage number, and then that's how much it does, and then that damage number kind of scales with player level. But what we find is that a lot of these things are really good in the early and mid game when they drop, but then when you get to the really late game, they kind of fall off really
Dice que tiene un problema con...
And what we want to do is find ways to add scaling so that the player can opt
Perfecto,
into, like, making
lo
a
veo
build
razonable.
out of these things. So
Dice,
if I wanna
a ver, hay
make
habilidades
a
como el
build
bárbaro o el
or
negro
dust
que
up
tiran
barbarian,
X cosas y
I can
aparece un
actually do
minion
that
o
and
aparece
see
cosas
what
que
I do.
atacan. Y
So
hace un
that's
daño
something that
flat,
we're
un
really
daño
excited
plano.
about, using
Pero
that
eso es un
as a
problema
possible.
porque en early mid game está bien, pero cuando llegas a endgame los números no dan, son inútiles. Porque no escala. Van a buscar formas de que estas habilidades escalen para que sean viables en endgame.
A lot of ultimates that we see that are just used because they buff the player in some way.
Yeah, they don't blow up the screen.
Y dice que hay un problema con las ultis y es que como no tienen daño, las usamos por los buffos que te aportan, no por la ulti en sí.
Grizzly Rage or other ones, right? So that's kind of something that we're thinking about in the mid to long term to make the game kind of open up and have more builds available.
So we've been talking here a little bit about sort of our philosophy here. We're about to get into patch notes. We're about to talk about Sorcerer. But we thought that it was important to talk a little bit about this philosophy, both because we want to be very transparent in terms of like how we're thinking about the game and what kinds of like why we're making changes, both so that when you see changes you can understand what we're thinking, like what we're going for, and also so that we can incorporate feedback from the community, feedback from you into these kinds of changes.
Yeah, and that goes down even to the format for this particular live stream, right?
Yeah.
So like we're gonna go through a lot of details really soon, which I think people are really excited about. I hope people are really excited about because we're gonna have a lot of those. And then afterwards, we want to hear back from the community about like how this worked. Like was this the best way to get this information? Did you get a lot of good data from us, and do you understand why we're doing making the changes
Vale.
that we are?
La gracia de este stream es que nos van a comentar el parche y esperan que les demos un montón de feedback esta semana para que cuando lo metan puedan balancear y ajustar en base al feedback.
Yeah, and this is like a multi-stage type of thing. So we're actually gonna. You guys are about to see a ton of slides here in a second, going through pretty much all the different detailed balance changes that are.
Vamos a ver los detalles de balanceo y tal, y quieren escuchar nuestra opinión.
Like we said, like we do plan on releasing patch notes so that you guys can actually read them in more detail, and in those patch notes will be, additional information such as like all the bug fixes and so forth that will be coming in with the game itself with 1.1.1. So.
Do we know when we're getting we plan on releasing those?
So we are. Look at this. We had
I'm
planned this to talk about it later,
sorry,
and now like.
Oh, sorry.
And now you're just gonna spoil it. We're actually gonna release patch notes, full patch notes. You guys will see these patch notes first here on the stream, but we will release patch notes next Wednesday.
¡Hala! ¡Qué hijo de puta! Nos van a enseñar las notas del parche aquí en el stream, pero no las van a publicar hasta el miércoles.
Yeah, so just wait for the end of the stream. We'll talk about when that's going to go out.
Al final del stream nos contarían cuándo sale.
We do want to jump straight into the balance changes and so forth, and we do want to start off with the sorcerer. So
vale, cambios al mago.
Slides and changes here that we do want to detail. So Adam, I know wants to go through them all.
Yeah, totally. So I think what I'll do is just give you a few moments to look at the screen and kind of see what we're doing, and then talk high level about some of the bigger changes here. So flickering firebolt is one. We're changing firebolt to basically just generate mana when you hit an enemy. Before it was only generated when you hit a burning enemy. So when you would just try and cast firebolt, without doing anything else, you would just always miss the first hit of getting the mana, which felt bad a lot.
That always felt bad. Yeah.
Yeah, it says negative feedback loop, so we're just going to make it feel nicer. You still feel nice about burning things and piercing, but you just get it more often. Probably another big one here is the greater chain lightning change I talked about, where every time that it bounces, the next hit will deal damage rather than bouncing off of you. And then we're also buffing the other choice for destructive chain lightning, so you get more crackling energies. Next one, let's go to the passives. These are all the key passives at the bottom of the skill tree. Isu's Ferocity is a big one. You're going to see a lot of these kinds of changes where it used to work kind of in a more narrow use case, and now it works in a case that it didn't, so that's just generically good. This one, it used to not really work on bosses very well. You had to kill enemies by critting them to get the bonus, and now you can also get it during boss fights by just hitting the boss.
Combustión pinta bien.
So you'll just have uptime and usefulness in a part of the game that it didn't.
Buffo ir Mastery, 15% más de daño.
Next, for Paragon, we're going to talk, let's see, these are a lot of the defensive changes.
Hostia, un 15% de probabilidad de golpe crítico después de castear Fireball o Meteorito. Este es un buen bufo.
Again, we're targeting that late game survivability for the Sorcerer. Another one that kind of
Este también está muy bien para la build de rayo.
Just makes it more usable is the Searing Heat Legendary node.
Un poquito más de tanqueo por aquí por el glifo, otro poquito más de tanqueo, otro poquito más de tanqueo. Está muy bien, es un 5 y 5, 10 y el 12% 22.
Yeah, damage reduction is actually like extremely strong in Diablo 4.
Está muy bien, un montón de bufos. Muchísimas gracias por los bits y las subs, gente.
Yeah.
Next one. Alright, so here we've got some more Paragon nodes. Again, damage reduction across the board.
Otra reducción de daño, otra reducción de daño. Otra reducción, otra reducción. Otra reducción, otra. Bien. Está metiendo un montón. Bueno, esto es Maximum Life, pero me entiendes. Está metiendo un montón de tanqueo al mago. Le hacía falta.
Now legendary, so there's a lot to chew on here.
There's your first one, Serpentine.
Yep, there it is. That's one we talked about before. So now you can have a Hydra.
El tema del encantamiento de Hydra, en vez de hacértela más corta, te da otra Hydra y encima dura mucho más.
Next we've got some, again, damage buff numbers, things that are underperforming.
Hostia, la build de fuego ha sido muy bufada, de 30-40%, de 40-80.
Before this one used to be that it only increased your crit damage of meteor.
80% de crítico de meteorito.
It was one skill and only healthy enemies. Now it's going to work on meteor and fireball.
Y Bad Lightning mete de 15 a 25. Han bufado un montón el mago de rayo y el mago de fuego. Al de frío le anda por culo, pero al de fuego y al de rayo lo están bufando sin parar. Está muy bien.
This one was it used to reduce your damage in exchange for the lightnings orbiting around you. Now we're going to increase it. So again, that's a pretty big.
El de fuego es super tanque, Recharging Aspect, vas a recuperar un montón más de mana. En vez de 2 de mana, ganas 3 de mana, que está muy bien. Cada vez que Shining Lightning rebota, incrementa los rebotes de 2 a 4, que esto fue un nerfeo que se llevó en alfa y se lo devuelven. Bonus de velocidad de movimiento de 4 a 8 segundos, bonus de velocidad de movimiento de 25 a 30. Tanqueo, esto es una pasada. La reducción de daño pasa de ser de un 30% a un 90% por cada enemigo. O sea, hasta un 90. Y 40% de daño del Frozen Orbit. Vale. Este me parece muy interesante. Legendarios. De 20 a 30. La duración de imparable de 3 a 5 segundos. Extra de armadura.
Incendiary aspect terrifies me, but we're doing it. This one used to be that it.
Las habilidades de piromancia te devuelven 10 de mana. Está muy bien.
And now it's going to just do it off of your pyromancy skills damage. So this opens up meteor, fireball, all of those other skills that aren't really firewall.
25% de reducción de daño mientras estás en tu propia ventisca.
Uniques, we've got the gloves of the Illuminator. This is the one where your fireballs bounce and deal AoE damage. Before, when you got this, it was kind of in a very weird place where the bounces could do it pretty often in such a way where you'd only hit an enemy once with a bounce.
Hostia.
And we have to put this damage penalty on it.
Qué interesante.
You can hit enemies multiple times with it, and it's AoE, and gives you a bunch of procs of all of your stuff, so it's really, really strong. But because you could only hit an enemy once, a lot of times this was just a damage nerf for your character.
Yeah, you'd bounce it one time on a monster, and that was that.
And now you got nerfed for getting unique, right? That never feels good. So we reduced the distance that it bounces a little bit, so it should be more easier to consistently hit an enemy twice. And then we also reduced that damage penalty, so now no matter what, if you hit an enemy twice, it's a damage bonus. And then we also replaced one of its affixes from damage to stunned to lucky hit to restore resource. And since this thing, bounces and hits enemies a lot of time, the lucky hit procs are very powerful with this. So we think this will be a lot more attractive for players. Alright, moving on to
Vamos con el bárbaro.
So, like I said before,
se aumenta, han dicho que van a aumentar un montón la generación de furia y van a hacer más interesantes los únicos. Generación de furia de 11 a 13, de 10 a 13, de 2 a 3. De 10 a 12, el daño se incrementa en el double swing de 40 a 50, en ruptura de 45 a 70 y la carga de 30 a 60 y hace que vulnerable dure 4 segundos. Para no querer que vulnerable sea el main, lo han mejorado. Habilidades.
Fury gain 11 to 13 and like 10 to 13, and they're always like noting like, well, that doesn't feel like a big number and so forth. But I think players,
by percentage, it's really big.
Yeah, by percentage,
it also
it's actually
scales
really
with a
big.
whole lot of other stuff. It gets spooky when we do.
Esto, aunque pueda parecer poco, cuando lo stackeas es bastante.
I think people are seeing some of the smaller numbers, but not realizing that, you know, other things obviously. It scales with other things and other and it mixes in with whether you other gear that you have and so forth. So this is just the baseline number, and you have to remember that obviously when that number gets tweaked, everything else gets tweaked. That gets.
Want to point that out too when we do like damage increases, where it might seem small because it's increasing the base that everything else multiplies and scales on. It can be a bit. I mean, sometimes it's not as much. We can go and do it again, right? But it's scary and risky. So we have to think about that, because it's very easy to be like, oh, just make it 20. And now, late game, you're just like bashing once and then getting all your fury back or something, right?
Right.
So. Alright, so violent upheaval. This one gives you berserking, and it used to be.
Si daña a los enemigos o al boss, ganas berserking durante 2 segundos, incrementado 3 segundos si daña al menos a 4 enemigos. Pasivas. Reducción de daño de 3 a 4% en Además reducción. Gushing Goats de 100 a 115, de 11 a 70. El daño de desangrado de overwearing. Hostia. Mientras estás en berserking, que se puede mantener bastante, 35% más de daño.
Yeah, so now when you overpower and get that AoE blood burst, it's actually going to do quite a bit of chunky damage, we're hoping. Walking Arsenal is another one worth calling out here. We heard some feedback that it's really hard to keep up all 3 of your weapon types when you're doing Walking Arsenal. Usually 2 is fairly easy. You can have a basic and a core that are different weapons, but getting that 3rd one to consistently happen, especially if you're using a cooldown skill like charge or leap or something like that, it can be hard to maintain that. So we're just increasing it to make it more forgiving. We should also increase all of those legendaries and other powers and and stuff.
That was possible for me
es
when
un
I had
buffo de sangrado
Deathblow
muy
charges.
interesante.
Whenever I was only running like 1 Deathblow charge at a time, like that build just didn't
Yeah,
really come
Deathblow is
online.
probably one of the more.
Este tiene pinta de que se van a replantear.
Yeah, for sure. This is great. It opens up a lot.
Yeah. So next, talk legendaries.
Legendarios. Ancestral Force de 50 a 58 de daño, pero también aumentan el mínimo. Las espinas pasan de .5 a de .75 a .85, bufo al bárbaro de espinas. Core Skill to Core Phone Increase de 20 a 30, ¿vale? La carga pasa de 100 a 125, el daño de Burning Rage de .28 a .38, a ver qué tal. El aspecto de volcados de 15 a 25. Y los terremotos pasan de 15% a 25%.
Alright, next, so uniques. We've got a lot of stuff here with barbarian uniques. Again, kind of the high level goal here
Los únicos.
we're generally improving just the base thing the unique does, and then also trying to replace an item stat that wasn't very attractive.
Se vuelve a cambiar cooldown reducción por crítico. Daño a enemigos afectados por control de masas por crítico.
Crimson, this is the one where you do blood pools when you rupture enemies. We're increasing the damage. We're increasing the damage that enemies take standing in pools, which is a pretty big buff.
Otro de daño a enemigos estuneados se cambia por velocidad de movimiento. Y cooldown reduction por ataque speed. Hostia, 45% de ataque speed, basic skill damage se cambia por cooldown reduction. Attacks reduce evade cooldown se cambia por evade charges. Daño físico reemplazado por vulnerable. Daño a enemigos afectados por control de masas reemplazado por crítico, que para no querer potenciarlo ya es el segundo ítem en el que hacen ese cambio.
Let's talk about. So, I was just going to say we said that we were going to buff sorceress and barbarian. We're going to make some changes in 1-on-1. But Adam, you've.
¿Qué acaba de pasar?
We don't want to leave the other 3 classes out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Most of these changes are that you've seen are for Sork and Barb. But I think we had some time to make some changes to the other classes.
We totally did, so we can go on here.
Se les ha escapado.
One thing I do want to call out, though, the focus of the patch is the sorcerer or the barbarian, so you're going to see a lot more for them. But we wanted to give the other classes something exciting as well. Rogues are actually, I think, eating pretty well right now, so they're pretty good. But we still found some things of underused things to buff. Probably one of the more big ones here is Forceful Arrow. We're changing the
Bufo al daño de los caltrops, de los caltrops. Cada tercer
We got some feedback on Rain of Arrows that it's kind of weird that the second wave was the one that knocked all the enemies down because
bufa el daño de la... Hostia, le van a bufar la trampa de veneno.
is in a certain state where the enemies are where you want to hit them and probably where you want to CC them.
Y le van a meter knockdown a la lluvia de flechas.
Because it happens on the second wave, you know, the first wave comes, does a little damage to everything.
They all move.
And then they all move, and then everything falls apart, right? So this just makes it more reliable.
It sets itself up.
It sets itself up, yeah, exactly.
Probabilidad de golpe de suerte pasa de 35 a 45. La reducción de daño de 18 a 27. Al daño en el tiempo. Y el Lucky Hit Chance de 75 a 85 con Siphoning Strikes. Legendarios. Únicos, Wineforce, le vamos a meter a fijos, a cambio se lo vamos a cambiar por vulnerable. Y daño de la ulti se lo cambiamos por cooldown reduction. Pues menos mal que no queríamos bufar eso. A ver al druida. Consigue mucho más recursos de todas las generadoras. ¿Qué más? Lobos. Incremento de daño a los lobos. A la activa y a la pasiva. De 20 a 25, Brutal Wolf Pack de 20 a 25 y Fortify de 5 a 8. Bufo 8 a los Wolves. Skills. Los Ravens, los cuervos, pasan de 13 a 20 de daño e incrementa el daño un 40% a la pasiva. Y la rabia pasa de 76 a 110. Legendarios, Metamorphic Stone. El coste de espíritu pasa de 60 a 50 y el daño pasa de 100 a 120. Interesante. El aspecto del alfa pasa de 100 a 115 y reduce... Da igual, no se va a jugar. No se va a jugar, no da los números, ya os lo adelanto.
And then for legendaries and the class mechanic, we're just buffing some things that are a little bit underutilized. So
no da los números.
And then Necromancer.
Necro.
So here we've got quite a few
Bone
things
Spirit.
going on. Bone Spirit. This is the enhanced Bone Spirit.
Se le mete una reducción de CD de 6 a 7 segundos. Se incrementa, perdón. Nerfeillo al Bone Spirit. Paragon. Se baja el requerimiento de Wild Power de 50 a 40. Esto es un bufo. Y el bonus daño pasa de 2,5 a 4. Esto es otro bufo. Legendarios. Empowering Reaper. Daño a enemigos con 20% de chance de spawn a Pool of Blight. Under the target. 60% bonus damage. This effect can only happens una vez cada 3 segundos. Hostias. Vale. Exposed Flesh. 10% de chance de generar 50 de esencia o en hit vulnerable enemy.
Totally makes sense to me now, and a year ago me should have thought of this. But
esto es un nerfeo.
The way that this used to work was Sever would spawn a pool of blight under enemies, and the chance was based on you critting them. So the idea was you would create a crit build, and then you turn your crit into these pools of damage, right? That sounds kind of cool. But it turns out, you know, crit doesn't work with dots at all. So that pool doesn't get scaled with the way that you make the pool. So it just doesn't work design-wise. I take the blame for that. But now we're changing it so you just have to damage enemies to spawn those pools of blight. So now this can actually be more friendly to dot builds. And then aspect of explosive.
Hostia, esto es muy interesante. Le han quitado el tag de con habilidades de hueso. Hostia, esto está rotísimo. Exposed Flesh era un 10% de probabilidad de generar esencia cuando golpeabas a un enemigo vulnerable con habilidades de hueso. Le han quitado el target de habilidades de hueso. Ahora puedes generar con todas las builds de Necro un montonazo de recursos. Decay de 40 a 45, bufo. Torment, la regeneración de esencia pasa de 30 a 170%. Vale, bufillo lleva el golem. Y el único Empty Tomb, la inteligencia fake se cambia por velocidad de movimiento. El cambio de anillo es brutísimo, Te preguntarán por la pasiva, igual le están bombardeando el chat con ese tema. No hay buffos a los minions,
mobility for
mira, minions.
Well, necromancers, they may want mobility a little bit. I heard
usually the slower
Vale, no, el cambio de los minions es que tanto el Barrock, el Fire Breath como los Élites Affix, Fire Enchantment, Electrify Obelix y Socket Lance hacen menos daño a los minions. Tus minions van a ser más tanques a estos ataques.
Dealing reduced damage to necromancer minions and druid companions, so your pets will just die less often to these things. And then now we got some of our generic updates. We only have a couple of them. The first one is to a malignant heart. This is the caged heart of spell breaking. And this one used to say that when you took elemental damage, you gained damage resistance to that element, right? It was thematic to reducing only that element. But we found that was really, really narrow. Again, trying to open things up so it's not so narrowly useful that you're not going to ever take it. So now it's just going to give you just generic damage reduction when you take elemental damage. And then our last one here for item updates.
Temerity, el pantalón.
So we got a lot
en
of
vez de stats le meten vida, la barrera ahora se basa en la vida.
Really good. But then we realized due to the stats on it that it just wasn't
vale.
the attractiveness that we
no está mal.
So even though this terrifies me, we're going to bump it up and see how it goes. But we're going to replace the all stats affix with bonus max life. The barrier is now also going to be scaling with your maximum life. And it'll properly be working with other barrier legendaries where you need a barrier to do certain procs and things. This will now proc with that as well. So we think this is going to be a pretty big buff to this item, and hopefully we'll see it in your max life and increasive healing builds.
Yeah, so we have a ton of updates coming to the classes.
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
We literally just went through it's quite an almost like an encyclopedia of stuff that, especially on the Barbin and Sorcerer classes. But I will say that it's nice that we got some stuff in for the Rogue, Necromancer, and Druid players as well. Making sure that we kind of buffed up some of the more undertuned stuff that we had seen.
One more caveat to all of that. I should have said this at the beginning. It's not final yet.
Not final
This
yet.
is planned.
That's why you probably saw the little
the odds are very high we do 90% of it or most of it, maybe even all, but as we get into the weeds of things.
Este parche va a ser medio dentro de una semana, gente. Las notas oficiales las vamos a tener publicadas a priori el miércoles. Bufo tocho al rogue de trampas de veneno, bufos tochísimos a todos los necros, no lo entiendo, bufo bastante decente al tanqueo del mago y bufo a la generación de recursos del bárbaro. Esto es un power creep en todos los aspectos, ¿eh?
That's right. That's also why we're not releasing patch notes today, and we're going to actually discuss when patch notes will be released later on the stream. So we'll reveal that.
And one thing I do want to note is because I'm seeing this a little bit in chat, and people are going hey, you guys are adjusting some tweaks with for instance druid summons and their minions. Same thing with there's a lot of questions.
Sí, el bárbaro sangrado y el berserker también los han bufado.
On minion builds and so forth in the future. Is that something you guys are still going to want to work on, look at in the future?
I can talk about this for a very long time. Yes. Druid and Necromancer are a little bit different, so I guess I'll talk Necromancer first. So Necromancer minions is absolutely a core fantasy of Necromancer players that minions are cool and awesome, and that you can raise the dead and have the dead fight for you. That is core. Minions, it turns out, in all games, not just ours, or summons or all that, are very complicated and hard to make work. They have a lot of moving parts that are different than every other class and build target.
Dice que el tema de los minions les da muchísimos problemas, que son difíciles de hacerlo funcionar, que en todos los juegos dan problemas, que levantes algo de play por ti es muy complicado balancear, que no los tocan en este parche, pero que lo tienen en mente, que quieren que los minions sean viables. Porque les da problemas por cómo proquean, por los hitbox, por cómo los agrean.
So there's definitely a lot going on there. We are thinking about it. There will be stuff coming, but no promises on when. But we are actively.
Que lo están valorando, que lo están pensando, pero que no prometen cuándo.
Because from the ground up, the class fantasy is not only minions, right?
Pero también dice que el necro no es solo minions. Una polla, el necro es minion.
About when launching the game is we didn't want the druid to have just as many or more companions than the necromancer, and they're stronger. It's where's the fantasy of the necromancer if the druid does it better, right? So that was something that we
y es como
with a lot. I'm sure that
que hasta el druida lo hace mejor y que incluso en Diablo 2 el druida lo hacía mejor. Una polla. Y que están pensando que claro que
the design space and the fantasy of the different classes, right? We don't want all the classes to be exactly the same because then you don't.
Quiere que la clase se diferencie lo suficiente que aquí, por ejemplo, el druida maneja mejor las pets que el negro. Pero porque habéis diseñado mal el negro, no jodas.
This class doesn't have this and it's fun. Give it to all the others, right? I think necromancer and move speed is part of that, where we overcorrected a little bit, where like. We didn't want them to have a teleport or dash, right, like a rogue.
No queremos que el negro tenga teleport y dash, pero queremos que tenga velocidad de movimiento para compensarlo. Pero no le vamos a dar muchas cuestiones, muchas capacidades de velocidad de movimiento, porque no entra dentro de su rol. Si lo que quieres es teletransportes y tal, hay otras clases que hacen eso. Hay que ser como fieles al core. También te digo, si quieres ser fiel al core, el puto negro es un invocador de muertos.
Is maybe a little bit higher than we expected.
Yes.
So this is one of those situations where, like, kind of in response to the fact that players are really hoping, like, Druid players are looking to go after this fantasy of, like, I am the master of the animal kingdom, and I'm going to have all these and nature, right? I'm going to have all these buddies with me. I think it's kind of like moving our hand a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, actually, there is something really cool here. There is fantasy here for us to really latch onto, and more that we can do. But to Adam's point, it's still very important we make sure that the necromancer feels distinct and the druid feels distinct after these changes go in.
Correct. It's the eternal struggle for us on class design.
Sure. Yeah. We also have a lot of like quality of life items that we wanted to talk about that we actually kind of hit on last week when we were talking on the Campfire chat that would be coming in 1.1.1.
Yo sabía que esto iba a pasar.
I know we wanted to talk a little bit more about those here. I know we have some changes coming for like monster density, for instance.
Yeah, I want to talk about monster density. So we've said a few times now that we're going to increase monster density in Nightmare Dungeons and Helltides. These changes are in 1.1.1, like we said last week. And I think we have an image of an example of a Nightmare Dungeon. So this is how it is today.
Yeah.
If you go into Nostravus Deepwood, of course, monsters are going to not be exactly like this, but this is an example of it. And then in 1.1.1, it's going to change, so you can see a lot more monsters.
Oh, yeah.
Estos son unos cambios del parche 1.1.1. Esto es una de las mazmorras. Las van a hacer más densas y a más dificultad haya, más densidad va a haber.
After you've achieved your build, being able to go in and mow down large numbers of enemies, deal with large.
Entonces, cuanto más buffes la build y más subas de nivel, más preparada tiene que estar para enfrentarte a más cantidad de enemigos. Se va a aumentar la densidad de las mazmorras, especialmente en las mazmorras de tier alto, los glifos de tier alto.
We've been doing the same thing, increasing density. As I said last week, there are some areas of Helltide that are highly dense, and we want to make sure.
También van a cambiar la densidad dentro de las mareas de sangre para que haya más densidad en algunas zonas.
Enjoy this increased density, so it's not just the people with the absolute top-end equipment. So we've also
van a intentar que esté escalado para que todo el mundo lo pueda notar el incremento de densidad, no solo quien esté en game.
Doing it in a way that performance stays reasonable, so you can actually, like, if we bump up density and then the game turns into a slideshow, we didn't.
Y que van a intentar hacerlo de tal manera que las diferentes builds y demás puedan sentirlo algo natural, que no sea una pared.
So we've been working on that at the same time, so that we can really hit that target. And this is something too that when 1.1 comes 1.1.
1.1.1.
Nejo, a tu salud.
We gotta have a different name for these patches. For these patches, it's fine. When that comes out, we're going to be looking at the density there and seeing how close it comes to this mission statement, this goal, right?
Y claro,
if it's not hitting this goal, then we're going to keep.
A más densidad, más experiencia, más escalado, más todo. Ellos tienen un goal, un objetivo. Van a ver cómo sienta el parche 1.1.1 y si no es suficiente meterá más densidad. Lo van a ir calibrando. Estamos en beta de densidad.
It's going to continue to inform us and let us do more and more double down some of these decisions as we go.
And then I know we have some changes coming in regards to bosses and so forth as well.
That's right. So we didn't talk about this last week, but we have gotten a lot of feedback before about the about players, particularly like in World Tiers 3 and 4, fighting like dungeon bosses and world bosses, and being able to go in there with their enhanced power. Now they've got like some uniques online. Their build has really come online. and they've got like a lot of like damage to vulnerable targets. You know, like they're mowing through some of these bosses faster than we expect, right? So, or rather, fast enough that's not really challenging and not really engaging. So we are boosting the health of bosses in world tiers 3 and 4. You know, at brackets as you're kind of going up the experience. But you know, in exchange for this, in exchange for making some of these pieces just a little bit harder as players are going through them, we are also going to be making a change to the rewards that you get going through these.
Yeah.
So now, like after 1.1.1 goes live, dungeon bosses starting at level 35 even. So this is before you can get into world tiers 3 and 4. And then it's the so once you've done that, or once you've killed those, you're going to have a guaranteed legendary item drop in that space. And that's going to carry up as well into World Tiers 3 and 4. When you complete a Legion event, that's going to also give you a guaranteed legendary drop starting at level 35. You know, there's a chance before 35, but there's guaranteed.
Dice que a partir de nivel 35 van a hacer cambios para que los bosses de mundo te garanticen legendarios, los eventos de legión te garanticen legendarios, los bosses de determinadas dungeons te garanticen legendarios, para que sea una forma de conseguir ítems.
This is funny. I did it. Please don't follow me on Twitter unless you really want to.
No me seguís en Twitter.
But I did a Twitter poll a while ago where I basically just said you know, what do you think is the chance in which a treasure goblin will drop a legendary item? And I said it was like, you know, 10%.
Dice que hizo una poll, una encuesta en Twitter de qué opináis de que los goblins siempre suelten legendarios.
Voters, I should say, right? All selected 10% was the chance, and everybody had their.
Dice que la chance de que lo soltaran más o menos era del 10%.
But the reality is at level, and I said level 50 treasure goblin as part of this.
Pero que la realidad es que lo tienen en un 50%.
Chance to drop legendary items today. And that's like going back to like level 35. We've got a very, very high.
Y que lo han bajado a 35.
Items, but
so what you're saying is sometimes I kill a treasure goblin and it doesn't drop a legendary item.
That's correct. That's exactly right. So basically, if you flip a quarter every 25 minutes, you know, that's basically your chance to get a legendary item when you're fighting treasure goblins in the overworld. And it's very easy to have like tails 5 times in a row, and then
that's what happens to me every time.
And as humans, we are 7 times more likely to remember a negative thing than a positive thing.
Dice que somos muy
This is nothing wrong with
que estamos muy predispuestos a recordar las cosas malas y no las buenas.
You don't see them that frequently relative to other content.
Y que no vemos los goblins con tanta frecuencia como otro tipo de contenido.
So what we decided to do is we've gone back and said, starting right at level 15 for treasure goblins.
Y que a partir de nivel 50 los goblins del tesoro te van a dar un ítem legendario sí o sí. Está diciendo que haya muchas herramientas en el juego para sacar legendarios, porque a nivel bajo tiene un 35, un 50%, y eso nos quedaba mal rollo, porque no te encuentras con un goblin todo el rato. Entonces te van a hacer más fácil conseguir el equipo principal, porque puedes hacer como diferentes cosas para sacar los legendarios.
Actually, probably more than 50% more fun. I will note,
but I break points.
The wonderful opportunity to drag in Gabi, the goblin.
The treasure goblin
into the frame.
Should I try?
Creo que ha dicho 15 y no 50, puede ser.
Very large plush.
Here's this giant treasure goblin that absolutely doesn't fit on camera.
Puede ser. Mi nivel de inglés igual ha flaqueado ahí un poco.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking about.
We have a lot of other stuff to discuss.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking about killing him. So yeah.
They're happy to be of help.
It is a plush. It is a plush creature. So yeah.
I know, and so we talked more about, or you actually, when we were on the stream last week. Sorry, about 2 weeks in a row, you guys. We talked about respecs and so forth. So I know that is also coming in.
Yeah,
in
we just want to confirm that the stuff we said last week, we're going to reduce respec cost by 40%.
Van a bajar un 40% el coste de reiniciar habilidades y Paragon.
Elixir stat count is going to go up to 99.
Yeah, and the stat shop is just purchasable by gold.
That's right.
So that's just to make sure that people don't think we're just selling it.
Tab 1's 100K, Tab 2's 200K, Tab 3's 300K, Tab 4's be 400K. So you can buy that for your seasonal stash and for your eternal stash.
Yes, exactly. And then one other thing that we did want to talk about.
Y van a meter un nivel más de pestaña que cuesta 400k.
In regards to like the leaving dungeon options and like teleporting out of dungeons and so forth. And I know you wanted to talk more about that here today.
I don't know. I think I explained it pretty well last time.
So clear.
There's a loop there. I don't know why anyone's confused. This is very clear. I'm just kidding. We're going to change it back to 3 seconds.
Yes.
Basically, the reason that we increased this is we have, in Diablo 4, we have a mechanic where when you're casting some kind of spell or power and you get hit by some damage, you don't get interrupted immediately. You have to take about 5% of your health and damage before it gets interrupted. And this makes things like town portaling back to town, leave dungeon, etc. feel a lot better.
Vale. Dice, en Diablo 4 funciona de la siguiente manera. Yo estoy canalizando algo y si me golpean pero no me quitan el 5% de la vida, no me interrumpen. Entonces, cuando estoy vaqueando hacia lo que sea y me golpean, no me interrumpe.
You're in the middle of a high-intensity combat fight or in the middle of a boss fight, and we felt like it was a little bit too easy to get out of that in terms, and that's actually what it's referring to, the loop, which again, I felt like I nailed it, but I guess you know, and so. You know, there are other ways that we could have solved that, right? We could have said like, oh, well, you get pushback on your cast, or like, oh, well, it's only increased to 5 seconds if you're in a boss fight, or something like that. But ultimately, you know, what players really accurately pointed out is, look, this slows down the core loop of the game in a way that's not fun.
Yeah.
So we're just changing it back to 3 seconds.
Yeah. So it was it 3 seconds, went to 5 seconds, going back to 3 seconds because. You know, obviously, good player feedback.
Vale. Incrementaron el tiempo del vaqueo de 3 a 5 segundos de canalización, me parece que era. Lo han vuelto a poner. Estaba en 3, lo subieron a 5 y lo han vuelto a bajar a 3.
You know, nightmare dungeons are a really big part of that. Last week we talked about how we were going to be.
A ver si han cambiado también lo del caballo, que ha pasado de 7 a 10.
More appropriately. So now, like, you know, the tier 70 difficulty was the old version. Rather, the old version of tier 70 is now the tier 100 after the changes that we made. To more accurately reflect the balance we have in Diablo 4 versus the kind of insane overtuned stuff we had prior for the tier 70 plus content. One other thing that we obviously are thinking about, like, you know, the scaling difficulty is one part of this, you know, but we also get plenty of feedback on some of the Nightmare Dungeon affixes themselves. And we know that some of these are sort of ones you're going to want to basically throw in the trash right away. So you're going to want to salvage these and get Citadel Dust immediately upon when some of these things kind of pop up. So a couple of the ones that we're actually going to be, for now, we're removing a few of these as we think about reworking them or deciding what we want to do with them. But we're going to be taking these out in 1.1.1. They're not going to appear anymore. That is, so the first is Resource Drain. It's not going to be showing up in Nightmare Sigils anymore. Cold Enchanted is not going to be showing up in Nightmare Sigils anymore for a bit. And then Backstabber is being removed as well as part of 1.1.1. Now, this is not by any means an exhaustive list of the things we'd want to like adjust on the affix side. You know, there's lots more that we want to do to kind of improve this experience. This is just sort of like while we're in here beginning to look at these things, we know that these are problematic. We have adjustments we want to make anyway.
Vale. Hay determinados élites que tenían unos afijos que eran la hostia de puñeteros y cuando salió un élite con 2 o 3 juntos eran insufribles. Han baneado que puedan seguir juntos 2 o 3 de los afijos. Porque algunos de ellos cuando salían juntos no se podía pelear contra ese bicho.
So we did, obviously we talked about the date for the patch notes beforehand.
I don't know what you mean.
But we do want to specify like that we are going to be releasing patch notes, full patch notes next week. It's actually going to be on August 2nd.
El miércoles nos van a publicar las notas completas para que las revisemos con posibles ajustes respecto a lo que han enseñado.
On August 12th, which is Tuesday.
Y el parche 1.1.1 sale el 12 de agosto, súper tarde. Súper tarde, dentro de 2 semanas.
Honestly, I have no idea.
I've seen so many calendars in the last day.
Tuesday after.
Oh, sorry. It is no. I lied. It is August 8th.
Yeah.
See, this is dates.
Everything's a blur.
August 8th.
Sorry, August 2nd is when the patch notes will be coming out in full, and then August 8th is when the patch will.
Eso tiene más sentido, aunque sigue siendo súper tarde. El miércoles 2 de agosto sale las notas de parche y el 8 de agosto es cuando saldrían las notas del parche. Es cuando saldría el parche en live. El 8 de agosto.
Stay tuned, of course, on the Diablo social media.
Sigue siendo dentro de 2 semanas.
We'll end up updating the patch notes there, so players can see it. Just remember, the patch is not that day. We're just posting the notes early.
Nos sacan las notas el miércoles 2 y el parche el martes 8.
These notes here, similar to how we're doing this here on this Campfire chat, and then of course August 8th is when the patch will end up going live for all players, so that they can actually experience it and jump through with all the changes that we are kind of detailing out here. And they'll be seeing in the final patch notes on Wednesday next week. We do want to jump into Q&A because we just went through a whole bunch of stuff right here.
Vamos a preguntas y
One
respuestas.
question that, as we start to populate questions, feel free to ask them in chat on Twitch, by the way, because we have chat enabled there. But I know one question and something that we talked about last week as we're waiting for questions to kind of come in was about XP in later game, or for late game players and stuff like that. Do we have any update and in regards to that specific
Vale,
topic?
algunos cambios al tema de la experiencia en late
We
game.
did talk about this last week, and what we said then was that we are not looking to make the game feel slower across the board. We're not looking to slow down the players' XP gain rate in response to feedback about some of the other changes that we had made. The goal was really we want to make sure the players are having a good time progressing through World Tiers 3 and 4, not feeling like they're hitting a point where it's really, really difficult to make progress. So in response to some of these thoughts, we had gone through and we had raised the amount of experience that you gain from before the 1.1 patch.
Hostia, qué difícil es traducir este tío que se traba tanto.
You get from
Nightmare
Dungeon completion, from Helltide Cache opening, from Whisper completion. We went and did a good buff on those activities.
Vale, han bufado las dungeons, los sigilos a nivel alto y han bufado las mareas y tal.
Yeah, so all this to say, we are committed to increasing the speed at which the players be progressing through these later world tiers.
Quiere que entre el nivel 70 y el 100 le vemos más deprisa. Nos están queriendo dar herramientas para que crucemos ese contenido de forma más orgánica y rápida.
But now that we've made a number of these changes, we do want to see what the impact's going to be on the overall XP gain rate across the board for players, and just seeing how different kinds of players are progressing, so that when we go through and we make changes, which we will be making soon, I think probably likely for Season 2, when we go through and we make these changes, that's going to be informed by what we see players going through and what their experience is like now.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really just a question of how much are we going to make adjustments, what's going to feel right, and that's going to be based on what we see from players.
Pero claro, hay diferentes tipos de jugadores y hay jugadores que esto lo explotan como muy pronto, otros que no, etcétera. Entonces van a ver para la Season 2 cómo ajustan en base al tipo de jugadores que hay el tema de la experiencia. La Season 2.
Very similar questions. One is from Febzilla, the other one's from Karnaga.
I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in really quick? Can I ask chat a question? Do you, yes or no, do you want Adam to read the names of people that he's getting the questions from in chat?
I think we should.
Adam.
Yes.
Okay, he's saying he should. Okay.
I think we should, just because I don't want to go into that whole situation
fine,
where
fine.
that other outlet
Okay.
made up names, and we don't do that. So,
Sure.
But Karnaga and Febzillas, they both ask about. People are all like, no.
I knew it.
Ha preguntado, ¿queréis que Adam lea los nombres de la gente antes de las preguntas? No me podía importar menos. Y entonces hemos escrito que no.
The question is about crowd control. Obviously, it is a huge and popular topic amongst the community. What are our thoughts about crowd control? What are we planning on doing about that here in the future?
I bet we all have thoughts on that, actually.
We do, yeah.
Yes.
Let me
You
just
can
say
jump on
first
that,
Control de
we
masas.
think that as you get into situations where there are lots of monsters on screen and high-end areas where the amount of damage that you're seeing going in and out is really high, so you're having to react really quickly. Situations where you're being hard CC'd or stunned or
Sí, claro.
something like that.
Cuando estamos en endgame, sobre todo ahora con el incremento de densidad, cuando te meten un hard CC, un super control de masas, fear, congelación, lo que sea, con tantas fuentes de daño, dice que esté ese CC, que esté ese control de masas, hace el juego mucho más divertido. Pero estos cambios en el 1.1.1, el cambio de densidad, un control de masas se traduce muchísimo más daño. Y esto es algo en lo que quieren monitorizar a ver cómo afecta al gameplay. Pero es algo en lo que están trabajando, en cómo vamos a tolerar el cambio en la densidad y el control de masas.
It's my favorite question because I always get this. It's from Cookie Drops. So, are you guys planning on addressing the issues related to the imperfectly balanced on Necromancer, the decrep aura on Necromancer, and those are addressed in 1.1.1.
Yeah, we fixed it.
Those are. We just didn't list all the
Vale,
bug fixes.
le han preguntado por la pasiva del necro que tendría que tener 3 puntos y no la tiene, por otras pasivas que no están funcionando, que si la van a parchear, han dicho que sí, que en un 1.1.1 lo parchean.
I know a lot of people have been asking, going well, I can only add 1 point, yet it says I can add 3, and so forth. So,
para quien no lo sepa, esta pasiva de aquí no nos estaba dejando ponerle 3 puntos y dice que lo parchean, que es un bug.
Resistances and what the intent is going to be with resistances here in the future. There's a ton of questions, so lots of names. But,
vuelven a preguntar lo mismo que han preguntado los últimos 25 cuestiones. Tema resistencias.
I think what the standard vision of most games is, which is everything is impactful and meaningful and feels good, and you invest and get rewarded for those things at all times. But reality is a little bit harder than that. But that is kind of the North Star in what we're trying to do. The idea is that when you invest in elemental resistances, you will notice a difference in the damage that you take.
Dice, la idea es que si tú inviertes en resistencia notes una diferencia en la cantidad de daño que recibes. Pero actualmente la armadura es mucho mejor que todo lo demás y tenemos que encontrar el balance perfecto y es algo que hay que valorar.
There's a lot of gray area there that we're talking about, but our goal is that, and when we go and really take a deep dive at it, is one, we don't want you to just stack armor and that's better than everything else. We don't want
no queremos que stackear armadura sea mejor que todo.
That's just better than everything else. We want elemental resistances to be meaningful, but we also don't want to get to a place where you fight a fire boss and you stack all fire resistances and it actually can't hurt you.
Dice, queremos que las resistencias sean útiles, pero no queremos que si te estás enfrentando a un boss de resistencia a fuego y solo stackear resistencia a fuego seas inmune al boss. Queremos que el boss tenga un impacto. Tiene que haber un balance, no puede ser que si vas a full resistencias a veneno, te metan 60 cargas de veneno y seas inmune. Tenemos que hacer un equilibrio entre la mitigación de daño por armadura y las resistencias. Hola Coco, gracias por la raid.
The big difference here is that resistance is a thing that you are going to stack and earn separately, and that they are usually tied to affixes or inherent affixes on rings and jewelry. So it means that some players will be able to go and encounter situations where they are not going to have a predictable amount of resistance when they go into an encounter, which means that we just need to think about what that is going to feel like for that player and imagine a world where they are able to still complete the content, but it's much more effective to have the appropriate amount of resistance. We need to make that feel impactful. Yes. So there's going to be situations where we are going to ensure that if you are getting into a predictable fight against a creature that you know is dealing a certain kind of damage and you don't have resistance in mind when you go into that fight, you're going to be penalized for that. That's going to be a really, really difficult situation.
Dice que por una parte sí que les gustaría que si tú te vas a meter en una pelea y puedes predecir el tipo de daño que te va a hacer y te puedes venir con las resistencias preparadas para ese bicho que tenga utilidad, pero no queremos que eso te haga inmune. Entonces sí que quieren que haya una penalización por no prepararte para la pelea, pero no que tampoco seas Dios contra él. Y ahora mismo las resistencias se sienten como que no llegan al objetivo que ellos tenían, que es que sean relevantes a la hora de pelear. Pero es una cosa que tienen en la cabeza.
And how, we've gotten a lot of feedback about mounts. We've seen Carbot videos. Our friend Carbot Animation had made an episode about mounts. Very funny if you haven't seen it. Highly recommend checking it out. But are there any discussions? Are you guys aware? What are you guys planning on doing in relation to mounts?
Yeah, there are a few changes here. So we want to make mounts feel better, sort of broadly speaking.
Monturas.
A couple of those things are making sure that the boost feels really good, especially with controller, where it's underperforming, and the boost actually, the boost mechanic on the mounts.
El tema de las monturas y el hecho de meterle un sprint. Les ha hecho un vídeo de coña Carbot Animation, los ha ridiculizado un poco, les hace mucha gracia, pero
there's a few other a key part of this is that the mount gets stuck on things, and that's part that's.
Dice, pero sí, que parte del vídeo de coña, que se topa continuamente, que no va bien.
So, we, in theory, the idea that you're riding through an area and some bandits or some skeletons have set up a barricade for you.
La idea era que tú no le dieras al sprint.
And fight all those skeletons. Like that sounds like a fun idea.
Y cuando un esqueleto lo que sea te agregaba, le pisabas el turbo y te pirabas.
You're just sort of annoyed, and you're like, well, can I kind of ride around the top of the barricade? And then it's a fight about whether the collision actually touches. Anyway, we're going to fix that. So there are some good changes to mounts coming.
Pero sí, que están balanceando y están pensando en cambios para la Season 2 seguramente, para el tema de la montura.
I'm seeing a lot of people talk about VRAM, like on PC and so forth, and like how that obviously grows over time with certain players, not all players, but certain players with certain spec machines, and they eventually either have to force close or the game actually just ends up closing itself, and then they have to
Dice
come
tema
back
de la
to the
RAM,
game.
de que tenga pérdidas de RAM y el juego a veces crashee y se cierre.
There was a update related to a memory leak that we ended up addressing, but then in 1.1.1, and I know that QA and so forth, our QA team has
Dijeron que en el 1.1.0 habían metido una mejora
a fix that's going to be coming in there
para evitar el tema de los leaks, de las pérdidas de memoria, pero en el 1.1.1 lo van a terminar de resolver.
So that will also be in 1.1.1. It's a popular question. I know a lot of people have been hitting me up on that one.
Porque está teniendo pérdidas de memoria el juego cuando estás jugando y satura y crashea.
Overpower and the intent behind it, what like future plans and so forth.
Sure,
Kind of similar to the
one,
resistance questions. I think there's a lot of questions related to a lot of these things that we do plan on actually addressing.
Totally, they're fundamentally like how the game works, so I understand. So the intent of overpower way back in the day was we really wanted to create a stat that was different than crit and felt meaningfully different that players could chase, that had kind of a unique mechanic attached to it. Where overpower sits now is that I really like the idea of it. I think is really cool, which is it rewards you for building a really tanky character and you get a big hit of damage. That's really, really awesome. It also scales
Overpower.
Your max health and
Una mecánica de daño para tanques, que en base al daño, a la vida, a la fortificación, etc., mete un extra de daño.
So we're trying to add another avenue, a vector to do that. And then the other thing that's unique about overpower and how we didn't want to just turn into critical strike chance and damage like a lot of mechanics.
Pero ahora mismo no se puede comparar con el daño a enemigos vulnerables y críticos.
Right? It's 3%
Sí, arrollar.
across everything, and you can never increase that baseline percent ever, and that is a design choice and a goal. And then the idea is that you can, however, get guaranteed overpowers by doing certain mechanics. So the Druid has some, the Necromancer has some, where it's like, hey, you do this thing, and the next one is guaranteed. So you can still play around it, but unlike crit,
se puede jugar en torno a ello, pero es complicado. El Necro y el Druida tienen formas de aplicar arrollar, pero el resto lo tienen complicado como mecánica que pueden elegir usar en plan en game.
The problem right now with overpower really is not necessarily an overpower problem, but it's really the crit vulnerable problem of these.
Entonces el problema no es con overpower como tal, es con el vulnerable crítico. Y es que por muchos números que le pongan no puede competir con el vulnerable crítico.
So we're looking at our revamp, like the dream and the goal and the utopia we're moving towards is all of these vectors, and not even just overpower.
El sueño, la utopía es que todos los vectores, elijas el que elijas, estén equiparados. Que puedas hacerte una build de daño de dot y funcione, una build de daño de overpower y funcione.
Give you a fantasy as a player, whether it's baseline or via legendaries and uniques, that you're able to build that into the late game and it's delivered on, and you can actually scale and be just as good as anybody else. That's the goal.
Y deberías de poder como jugador elegir la rama que te dé la gana y escalarla y que sea tan buena como cualquier otra. Pero ahora mismo no es así.
Overpower is another stat that you can actually chase meaningfully via lots of other stats too that it combines with to make a build. And that's kind of the point.
Overpower es otra de esas cualidades que puedes intentar potenciar, pero ahora mismo no llega.
I don't know if this group up here can fully answer it, but it's something that we can follow up on, which is the zooming in and zooming out on your character, getting a wider look of gameplay and so forth. I know there's like performance implications to that because it increases the draw distance and so forth, and we have a ton of different platforms, so it has to.
¿Por qué no podemos quitar un poquito más de zoom al juego?
If we were to make that type of change, because even when it does zoom out on bosses and so forth, there's like some resolution or scaling and so forth that kind of occurs there.
Resolución, escalado, problemas.
Me engineers, if I'm saying that wrong, but maybe that's another topic we can bring up during like another campfire chat with engineers, possibly to.
En otro campfire podemos hablar sobre el tema del zoom con algún ingeniero presente que tenga puta idea de lo que están hablando.
After the campfire chat, but I know that's a question that a lot of people have been asking. And then there's questions regarding are there any additional options for customization down the road that you guys are looking at, like pets or wings, etc.
¿Estáis pensando en alas, pets o algo más de customización? No creo que esa sea una pregunta real de este campfire.
Obviously creating additional more content for players to play through at the moment, more so than some of the cosmetic pieces and so forth. But it is something I know that players have been asking for.
Yeah, we want to add more stuff like that. That stuff is really fun to add. But we felt that right now, what was really important is helping sorcerers, helping barbarians, and
Dice sí.
some of these other buffs.
Queremos añadir todo eso, pero ahora mismo lo importante es bufar al bárbaro, bufar al negro, al mago, hacer los balances, arreglar cosas que no funcionan y luego ya nos metemos en polladas.
All the changes that they're seeing today is this like encapsulating everything that we're doing. We had a question in here regarding, like, for instance, someone enjoyed playing a frozen orb sorcerer in like Diablo 2, for instance, and wanting to have that same type of fantasy in Diablo 4. Do you guys plan on doing additional adjustments in the future?
Dice, vale, después de haber visto los ajustes de hoy donde bufáis al mago de rayo y al negro de fuego, ¿hay planes en el futuro de bufar mecánicas que ahora mismo no son viables como el orbe de frío?
Forevermore long term, really, infinitely long term, is the idea that, you know, every fantasy that we sell you, and I could talk a lot about, I talk to the team about this all the time. Like,
and by sell, we
yeah, all right, yeah, sell is probably the bad word, but I think that way, like,
we're advertising it. Like, if you see it on legendary aspects,
that's really what I mean.
If you see it on passives, you see it on skill tags, like, we're saying, like, hey, look, this is a cool thing for you to go
When we
after.
show you something that is cool and awesome, we
Dice, sí.
deliver on it, right? Like, when you log into Necromancer, you see right away, just when you see your basic skills, like, hey, there's a bone thing, a shadow thing, and a blood thing, right? And then there's army stuff. All of those things should be delivered on and be awesome. And then as you go through the game, when you get legendaries and uniques, you should one, double down and make those things really cool, and two, unlock.
Idílicamente todo tendría que funcionar. Cuando tú entras en el juego y no conoces nada del balance y ves las habilidades, piensas, puedo utilizarlo todo, qué bien. Y luego encuentras legendarios que pueden hacer determinadas cosas y ya te enfocan. Y entonces hay mecánicas que son divertidas, pero sencillamente numéricamente ahora mismo no son rentables. Vamos a adaptarnos, vamos a upgradear. Y la idea es que todo sea viable.
Make it something good, right? Like,
Que
at the
tengas
end of the day, the
posibilidades.
players are the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner for us. Of like, did it work? Is it good? Is it fun? Yes or no? If not, then we have to be malleable enough.
Funciona, es viable, es divertido. Si la respuesta es no, nos toca reworkearlo. Hay que editar únicos, hay que editar legendarios, hay que hacer construcciones en base a eso. Y ahí es donde entran las temporadas.
To Adam's point, it is a never-ending process. You know, we keep talking about how, you know, we're all here trying to make Diablo 4 the very best game that it can be, and the reality is this is through iterations, the conversation with the community.
El juego ahora mismo no es la mejor versión que pueda ser y ya está, sino que esto es como una conversación. Y según lo que pida la comunidad o según cómo vayan habiendo como una especie de anhelos por parte de la comunidad, ellos irán adaptando el juego para responder a nuestros anhelos. Y ahí es donde está la gracia del feedback. El parche sale el 2 de agosto.
And, you know, provide full feedback and so forth, and then of course
tienen una semana para leer el feedback antes de presentárnoslo.
Out my tick earlier, and so forth. Stop that, Adam. That's my tick. I will stop that one day. I probably won't. But we actually do have our patch for 1.1.1. The date will be on August 8th as well.
El parche 1.1.1 se presenta el 2 de agosto, pero se lanza el 8 de agosto.
Hitting on August 8th, which is Tuesday. So looking forward to
que es martes.
Everyone's feedback, everyone jumping in, and checking out, of course, the new changes coming to pretty much every class now in regards to.
Y va a haber cambios a todas las clases, pero los cambios gordos son a mago y bárbaro.
And so forth.
Now you're in your own head.
Now I'm just stuck in this like my own empty room saying it over and over.
2 semanicas, gente.
And get us feedback.
Para cuando nos vayamos a ir a Poe.
Like this format for talking about patch notes.
Exactly. Yeah. We want to see if this works out really well with the community. So yeah. Please provide feedback, us going through the notes, and then of course releasing the notes afterwards.
Estaréis la mitad en Baldur's Gate, la otra mitad nos iremos a por el 18. Este parche llega muy tarde.
Thank you guys again. We hope you enjoyed this Campfire Chat ++, New Game ++.
Sure.
And we will see you on our next stream, which we haven't announced one. We're thinking about doing some Campfire Chats with like maybe other teams here, with other, art, animation teams, audio teams, and so forth, just so you guys can see kind of a deeper look into some of the development within our seasons and Diablo 4 from other people. So we do plan on expanding these a little bit more, and of course, having Campfire Chats and dev update streams to talk more about the game, gameplay, and design, and so forth.
You did it again.
Thanks. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you again from the Diablo 4 team here at Blizzard, and yeah, have a great Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Nos vemos.
Mi mamá son primos hermanos y yo tan normal.
Tan normal, tan normal, tan normal. Y